I feel like as far as like where we're at, both what we've just done and then how that translates to what's next and how it feels like, at least at this point, how it feels like it's going to go. Who knows? In probably a couple months, I'll be like, we fucked it all up. But, you know.
Oh, yeah, but differently.
Butterscotch
Shenanigans. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 474 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam. I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's June 28th, 22 by 4.
Took to that one a bit.
Yeah. Sorry, we're recording 10 minutes earlier than normal, you know? So
it's wake up.
I'm still waking up.
Yeah.
Now, before we go any further, profanity warning. There's going to be profanity. And also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. All right, Adam, go ahead and swear away. Let's go.
I wasn't going to, but I was just, when you were kind of like stumbling over the date, and when you said 8th and very like kind of drawn out, then I was listening to it and I was like, do we say 8th the same way? Because like, I feel like I put it.
I tripped myself up by thinking too hard about how to say the word 8th.
Yeah. Is there a hard T in there or is it just a
Or do you just kind of trail off with a
eighth? No, there's a T.
Yeah, I say
it's actually EIGTHT. Why is it H? Is it AI? What?
8.
If you think 8 is crazy, don't even get me started on height.
Oh
HEIGHT. No thanks. No thanks. What are we doing here? What are we even doing here? All right, now listen.
What?
Listen.
Go.
I got a life update. Something interesting happened in my world this week.
We'll see. We'll decide if it's interesting or not.
All right. So on Tuesday, clear skies, beautiful day. Mid-afternoon, it's kind of toasty. You know, I'm looking at the forecast and it says, hey, bro, there's a chance of severe weather. I was like, fuck are you talking about?
Cloud in the sky.
I look at the hourly thing and it's like 5% chance of rain, 5% chance of rain. But that severe weather warning is still there, right? And it's like, there's probably going to be hail. Wind is going to be crazy. Okay. I don't know why. I just, as I was looking at this, I was like, no fucking way. It's just a beautiful day outside.
I mean, the weather's wrong from time to time.
Yeah. But also by beautiful, you mean 103 degrees outside because that's how hot it was.
Yeah. So then, and also like I have a habit of looking to the west because that's where weather comes from for us, right? So I'm looking to the west, it's clear skies. There's kind of like some stormy stuff going on to the east, but I'm like, that's over there. That's their problem. That doesn't come this way. And then the wind started coming from the east.
Sneak attack.
Beast from the east.
And I was like, that's not normal. So all of a sudden we start getting just instant torrential downpours. We start getting hail. So Sampy and I are like, oh yeah, love a good storm, right? So we're just kind of like hanging out with the dogs who are not having a great time. We're just kind of looking out the window and just kind of watching the storm. And all of a sudden we like just really loud lightning strike. Like real fucking like shook the whole house. And we were just like, oh, that's crazy. And then just kind of carried on with our day for the next like 15 minutes or so. And then Sampy ended up going to the kitchen. She looked out the side of the house there into our little like a home gym, which is like a kind of a sunroom that we converted into a home gym. So there's lots of windows around it. And I just hear her, she's like, what the hell? And so normally I'm like, it's probably like a branch fell down because that kind of happens with like crazy wind and stuff from time to time. No, come over to the side of the house and take a look. And there is glass everywhere and wood everywhere because that loud lightning strike hit a tree that's probably about 20 feet or so from our house. It's like a big oak tree. And the lightning hit the top of the tree, ran down the trunk down to the ground, and it just exploded like a 30-foot tall gouge of wood out of the side of the tree, shattered it into like a million projectiles of like bark and scraps of wood, shot all of them at my house. And shattered 4 windows.
Jeez.
And there were pieces of wood on the opposite side of my property from the tree. So like at least 100 something feet away from this tree, just like
Blasted.
4 foot long strips of wood. There was wood in the neighbor's yard. It was crazy. So all of a sudden, I had a lot of questions to answer.
Yeah, you got a lot of calls to make. Yep.
Because first I'm like, wait, what do I do about this? I've never actually had to suddenly deal with simultaneously a bunch of broken windows and a tree that might be dying. And I'm not like, obviously we can't do chest compressions on this tree.
No.
So who do you call? So I start calling some tree people. I'm like, that's priority number 1 because this tree needs medical attention stat. You know what I mean? The windows, they can wait. So I got some tree people. So they're coming. I got some glass people. They're coming. But like just by chance, also in this week, we had like several electrical problems unrelated. And so we had like electricians coming and man, like what a clusterfuck. You're just minding your own business and all of a sudden there's an explosion and wood and glasses everywhere. And then you got to change your whole plan for the week.
I do very much love that meme. The like fuck that guy in particular sort of a meme where it's just like you just get hit by lightning or just something terrible happens because that's just it's just your day, you know.
It's just a reminder that the universe really you're just kind of passing through, and the universe is just doing stuff, and sometimes you're in the way. So yeah, that was
interesting. I'll give you that. That was good.
That was wild, and I gotta say, it was good that it happened to that room because that is the one place in our house that's actually disconnected from the rest of the house. Yeah. Like we don't have heating or cooling in that room. It's a sunroom, right? It's like a Four Seasons room or whatever you call it. And so sometimes it's real hot in that room. Sometimes it's real cold, but it's just single pane glass with no insulation. It's almost like an outdoor porch area, you know? So the fact that we got 4 broken windows there, it's like, okay, yeah. Like
we'll just not go there for a while. It's fine.
This room will just still be hot and humid, like normal, and maybe a little bit more damp than normal.
Is it the case that I assume home insurance would cover this?
Yeah.
Because like
if it's one of those threshold questions too. You know,
I doubt it. Yeah, it's like I'm not even bother calling them because I don't want to talk to insurance people, but also the price to just replace like 4 single pane crappy windows is definitely not going to meet any kind of like deductible threshold.
Windows are expensive.
Or anything.
It might.
Not these ones.
Good windows. We replaced all the windows in our house a couple summers ago, and that was fucking expensive. But we're in a historic neighborhood.
So you
had to be wood.
And there's nothing historic about these windows. These windows should be forgotten to the tides of time.
If anything, it's a blessing that I got such a swift murder so
That's
they
true.
can be replaced by someone younger and stronger.
Yeah. But I gotta say the bigger challenge of all of it was us just looking at like just shards of glass all over the place.
Yeah, big glass is the worst.
Big ones, small ones, inside the house, outside the house, in the yard, mixed into the mulch. And we're just like, what do you do with this? Because you can't just like pick them up and throw them into a garbage bag. They'll just rip it to shreds, you know? So there's all kinds, like you got to get a hammer and like break all the glass off out of the window frame. And then you need some kind of container to keep the shards from hurting garbage, pick up people.
It's the sharps problem, right? It's like the same reason you can't just like throw a razor blade into the trash or whatever.
But what are you going to do? Like vacuum your lawn? You know what I mean? Like you can't, it's like when you go to the beach and then you come home and like 2 weeks later, somehow there's like sand somewhere that was just
there.
It's just there now. So yeah, you're going to just find glass shards sort of.
There's just going to be glass shards everywhere.
Yeah, so nobody gets stabbed.
Yeah. So
wear your shoes.
Yeah, and it's in our like gym room, so I'll be wearing shoes in there. So it's all good, you know. But man, that was wild. What a twist to my week. And then just all that stuff going on this week. We had some other stuff we were wrapping up with Crashlands too. So I was like in the zone trying to get as much work done as possible. But then all of a sudden, it's just like phone call after phone call, and people coming to check stuff out. And oh man, when it rains, it pours, and then lightning hits a tree, and then it explodes, as they say. Yep. So let's talk about Crashlands too.
Yeah, well, I think it was like 15 minutes before your tree got exploded. You made the build.
Yeah.
That was basically our like
milestone submission.
Like a milestone submission, and for Crashlands 2's second act, essentially, to be wrapped. And of course, there's the usual other stuff to kind of go back and
it's
add to it.
done, but it's
but you can
done.
play through
It's
the whole
done.
thing. Yeah, you can play through the whole thing. And that took a minute, you know. We've been working on that since the start of the year, so since January. It was like got back from I believe in like end of November we did the alpha with about 40 people, which we talked quite a bit about on the podcast. After that, we basically wrapped up all of the first act stuff using that feedback, made a bunch of improvements, put all the final bells and whistles on basically. And then when we wrapped for the year, our plan was to come back, hit the new stuff as hard as we could, and see how fast we could do it. And the major question, the major concern, of course, was that, you know, up until that point, it took us 3 years to get that, essentially that first biome done, right?
Yeah, but we couldn't tell what that actually meant.
Yeah, because it's not actually like the first biome from a content standpoint. It's actually like...
It was how to make the game.
It's basically most of the game, right? But not most of the content. And they were inseparable during that period because all of the content we were building was essentially first-time content, which required the new systems, right? So with the game changer and all this stuff, we were like, okay, you know, we're pretty sure we can do a biome in like, I don't know, maybe 6 months or something. It doesn't seem too crazy that we could figure that out. And then we just kind of embarked on it.
Well, and when you say biome, you mean it's not just like the creatures and the plants. It's like it's the whole, everything.
The act,
the
yeah.
story, the quest.
Yeah, it was just
the
called
whole
Act. It was Act 2.
Yeah,
Right?
Act 2. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we embarked on that basically the first week of January or second week of January, something like that. And just finally arrived on the other side of it. And it's been a fascinating ride, certainly. As far as like production processes and I guess figuring out how to do that, because it turns out that because all of the stuff previously, all the content that was put in the game previously was paired with systems dev, that really when it came to sit down and like just like print this zone, we didn't actually know how to do. We didn't have a really good method actually for doing that. Like strict.
Well, I think
content
it's even worse than that. We thought we knew how to do it.
Yeah.
Because we now had a complete Act 1. And so we could look at Act 1 and be like, okay, what's in an act of Crashlands 2? What are all the things that need to exist for us to stitch together to make this thing a playable big old chunk of the story? And so we thought we knew the answer to that question because we had just finished Act 1.
Or at least had enough reference points, right? To like make a list, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And so the thing about the game changer is it's great for creating gray box.
And that's our internal tool for content management to like make all of them.
Yeah.
All the items that go into the game and stuff.
So for example, you know, if Sam says like, oh, hey, Seth, like we need this new like kind of a tree that's going to be in this zone. You know, we'll kind of talk about the mechanics of the thing. Does it do anything interesting? What kinds of materials is it going to drop or whatever? And I can then just go ahead and stub in a gray box version of that tree where like it doesn't have any visuals. It's just like a box, a cube or whatever. And it's just sitting there. And we can start to put it into the game and interact with it and have its mechanics working. And then, you know, later Sam would come in and get the visuals hooked into that thing. And so we were like, okay, well, given that we can start playing around with the mechanics of all these different things and the recipes and the gadgets and like all the different things you can unlock, let's just go ahead and pre-make all of everything, all of it, because we can see what we have in Act 1. Let's make some versions of those kinds of things in Act 2, and then we can expand on that stuff and add more interesting stuff as well. So we pre-created like 200 something items to put
in
like
days.
2 weeks.
Yeah, like just no time at all, right? Which is insane from just a fact perspective. But yeah, in terms of what it meant, really, it's almost like, you know, like mise en place, where when you're cooking, you like get all your stuff organized and like ready.
That's kind of how we're thinking about it.
That's what we're thinking about. Yeah.
Just get all the pieces ready to go, and then as we need them, they'll just be there ready to go for us to, you know, we'll have our chopped onions and we can just throw them right into the dish, you know. So we did that, and then we also had this kind of this philosophy of trying to create this act in sort of vertical slice mode. So vertical slice basically just means that, let's say like in the first 2 hours of gameplay in this act, then literally everything you see will be 100% complete. So every quest you come across its dialogue will be fully finished. The characters will be fully rendered. Every single creature will be fully animated. There'll be side quests. There'll be all this, just everything, pets, whatever. Everything will be there. And so that was our kind of mindset coming into this. Cause again, like we didn't build Act 1 in a planned way. We just iterated on it while developing our tools. Yeah. And so we didn't have an answer.
While feeling out the systems, I think importantly, like we tended to build like a thing at a time because that was all we could support in terms of figuring out every new thing we built required a bunch of other stuff to be built essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So coming into it with this kind of like pre-printing everything in advance as placeholder items and then going with this vertical slice mode created a very dumb situation for us, which was that so the first thing is the difference between side quests or like side content and core critical path content. So when we're thinking about what it means to have like a critical path versus a side quest, it's really just like what does the player have to do in order to progress through the story and to advance through the game versus what things are fully optional for the player to do as cool bonus things. Like you don't, like in Crashlands 2, you don't actually have to ever get a pet. Mm-hmm. You will because you'll want to, but that also means that any given pet is not necessary for the story to move forward. You can go out and get them at your whim. So when we're kind of like developing the critical path, we're building out the zone, we're building out the main stories, we're building out the characters and the towns and all that stuff. And what we didn't realize was that in Act 1, we had much of the critical path before we started going back and doing pets and like adding in all these sorts of optional things. And it made it very easy to add those side quests because they had a platform to build on top of.
And something
like we had a
canvas
canvas
while they went and
yeah. And so that means like if you want to say like, oh yeah, we want to have like an interesting quest for you to acquire this pet. Well, if the world doesn't even exist, then you can't make that side quest be about anything yet. So it has to be like really generic and bland. Basically, it's like, oh, chop 10 trees. There's your side quest because we have trees and that's all we've got, right? So at the beginning of working on this Act 2, I think it was maybe 6 weeks that we were kind of like trying to.
Well, first they had to make you had to make the fucking ground.
Yeah,
right?
we had a big terrain building.
Yeah, you literally have to make the ground that stuff is on, and that takes a minute, quite a long time. So we had basically to build out terrain, then you just had to build out like the first suite of resources. But even that turns out to be challenging to figure out what is the first suite of them. Because if you look at a game, like if you played the demo, for example, it's very easy to look at it and be like, oh, it's like the popwood tree. It's like the big first resource because that's like what a lot of stuff goes into armor or whatever else. But actually, there's basically like a soup of resources that live across the whole zone that are like interesting things. The Explungus, this weird explosive thing that you can touch. Panflakes, which provide healing items. These raygrass blades that are all over the place. Like there's things that actually you basically need essentially to set up a whole ecosystem, right? To actually initialize the zone. So you have to do all the terrain. You have to initialize an ecosystem, and then you have to provide we refer to as chewables, which are, if you play the demo, these essentially they don't drop anything. They're just like stuff that you have to chop through. They provide these little, it's a combined like decorative environmental object and the thing you can use as like little blockers or things that players have to
kind of corral the player in certain directions.
Yeah. And it turns out that those are actually, which we didn't even realize at the time, we had backburned those because they're a pain in the ass to make. And so it was like, all right, we'll worry about those, once we're a bit further in. But it turns out that those are like critical.
They're just actually like kind of the most important thing.
Yeah. They're essentially the same as terrain. They're like 3D terrain, essentially, right? Where it's like a thing that helps shape out how the whole world works. So we made a series of these, I would just say, strategic miscalculations, right? About like both what was important, build order, that sort of stuff. And did so in such a way that because we knew that it was going to take a while to get stuff up and running, because it is sort of like true, right? In the sense that, okay, we're going to need some amount of stuff before we can get started. But because we prioritize like the wrong stuff, essentially, and then actually too much of other stuff, we did all the resources for the whole fucking zone before we started, right?
Yeah.
All of them. Then we ended up in a spot where it took a lot longer to get to a place where we could essentially like really, really actually start in a way that would deliver a playable experience. And that was kind of the thing that switched it over finally for us. And actually, not too long ago is the insane part. Like, it was like 8 weeks ago, 8.5 weeks ago.
8 weeks ago, yeah.
We were still like at the beginning of the act, which feels insane to say.
Yeah. I mean, we were producing tons of stuff, but when it came to the fully playable integrated experience, we just didn't have that really.
Yeah.
You know,
which again feels crazy because we talk about DevOps on here all the time. We talk about small batch delivery, talk about like how important playable is, whatever. And I think it just goes to show that like it's very hard to figure out the shape of the thing that you need to make, like really the minimum shape that you need to make in order to deliver a playable experience. And it's very easy in the middle of a project in particular to think you already know what you got to do and then feed that into a miscalculation, right? About this.
I think we also had kind of I don't know what the term would be, but like we had this kind of weird divergence in sort of like responsibilities because of things like the demo where like I was being pulled away from working on content and, you know, collaborating with Sam and Jen on story and stuff like that, because we had to get this demo put together. Mm-hmm. So there was a ton of work in developing the features that would allow the demo to exist, and how do we like mask text in the file, like what, you know, we've talked in the past about all the problems with the demo. And, you know, that's weeks and weeks of planning and work and code and testing and, you know, all that stuff.
It's sort of interspersed throughout this whole saga, you know, because literally we had to deploy that a month ago. Right?
Yeah. And we had kind of a set of game maker issues that we were working through as well. So I was spending a lot of time collaborating with the game maker team on all that stuff. And Sam was kind of siloed off to like just printing out all these art assets to fill in all the gray boxes basically that we had made. Right. And then Jen was trying to develop the story, but she was struggling because, well, like nothing existed and nothing was actually playable.
It's
so like how do you make a
place, right?
Yeah. How do you make a story about that? But then she didn't feel like she could, you know, pull me off of the demo because we needed the demo, and she couldn't pull Sam off of art because
we said we needed
the art.
Yep.
Yeah. So we all kind of went into silo mode, working on our own, and we were all working on a bunch of stuff, but just because we didn't kind of converge back together from time to time and kind of reorient our priorities on things, we ended up just like doing a lot, but not able to pull it together.
Yes.
In a coherent way until
I think to me
recently.
the big most important piece for me was basically that I was thinking about like I was actually looking this up this morning. You know, have you ever seen an industrial cable machine? Like, you know, those big ass cables that you see like running for bridges and stuff that are holding up a bridge where it's like a steel, like a woven steel cable or whatever. If you see how they essentially spin, like how those things get put together, there's this big ring that's got like 10 threads of steel going through it, and it all comes out right completely disparate. They're technically going in parallel, but they're not touching yet. And then it kind of forces them while spinning into this cable point, right, where they're like
kind of braids them together.
Yeah. And I think it's almost like what we did is it's like if you put the braiding part of that machine like 100 yards away from the starting part of that. Like all the cables coming out of this, right? That's essentially what was happening.
All the cables start sagging because they don't have the strength.
Exactly, and then it's like
braided.
Yeah, and it all starts getting funky. And it's just a reminder to me that like one is we always talk about like the shape of your structures and the shape of your production processes is what determines both how well people are doing on your team, as well as, you know, whether or not you can get your shit done. And all of us knew that everybody was working really hard, but there's also this like increasing sense of like, why are
things not moving as fast as they should be?
Yeah.
You know?
And again, there's also all this background noise because of the demo. We were doing getting all of our marketing efforts started up both for Next Fest as well as like international stuff. There's just like a ton of shit going on, just a ton in the background. And I think it basically all pooled together in a way where it took a very long time to see what the fuck was happening, right? To like really be like, okay, is this not working? Because we knew it was going to take a while. And I think that's the tricky part for me is like, because there's an initializing step to something like this, if the expectation is, it's just going to take a while because we have to lay the groundwork, it's really hard to know when a while has become too long. You know what I mean? In that context.
Yeah. Well, it also means you've started with the assumption that whatever is happening is what has to be happening.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Independent even of how long it's taking. You're just like, well,
you're like, we don't need to check in on this because
yeah, exactly. The early part's gonna suck and be hard and take a long time. So now that's just what you come in with.
Yeah.
And then hey, it sucked and was hard and took a long time. That's exactly what you expected.
Unsurprising.
so
as intended.
Yes, there's not a chance to take that step back and be like, wait a second, was that a true assumption to start with?
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
There's nothing to evaluate against if it's supposed to suck, right? Because normally the suckiness is the signal that, hey, we should change something.
Exactly.
Yeah, like Sam was saying, so many things have to exist before you can do anything.
And that is true. That is definitely true.
And that's definitely going to be true. So like we can't reliably build out the first part of a zone if we have no idea what the resources even are going to look like. Like we may know what mechanically they're going to be like. Oh yeah, we got this like tree that does this thing or this plant.
But you actually need them basically finished in order to use them.
Because
the aesthetics actually are
form follows function.
Yeah. The aesthetics are really important.
Yeah.
They communicate so much about the world and where to go and how things fit together. And we can't build a zone out of gray boxes, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but also like if we only have a tree, well, we can't build a zone out of that either because like what goes with the tree? What kind of creatures go there? What kinds of flowers and plants are nearby? It's an ecosystem.
It is, yeah.
And so it does have, like we've talked in the past about in game jams, a lot of times people make the mistake of trying to make something like a simulator or whatever, or things that require lots of AI. And those are tough because you can't evaluate whether anything is working until everything is in. Yeah. Right. So like if you're making a city builder, it's like, all right, well, I've got roads, but now you just got a road builder. Like that's nothing. I've got buildings. Okay. But can I just build them indiscriminately or like what types, like other types of building, like, oh God, and then it just keeps getting deeper and deeper. And then it's been 3 years. And then finally you can hit the play button and be like, so is this good or what? So, we have kind of a same problem, which is like we need a whole ass ecosystem in order to begin moving forward. Mm-hmm. But I think the mistake we made was we forecasted all the way to the end of Act 2, and we're like, we need everything, like not just the ecosystem stuff that you're gonna see when you first enter the zone, but just all of it, everything that's crafted, all the creatures, all the side quests, all the pets, all the character, like the whole thing. And so that kind of short circuited things, and so now going forward into Act 3 as we get started working on that, we'll be making changes to kind of reorient around playability, which is if I walk into this zone, like how does it feel? What's missing? What do we need here? And make that stuff in that moment in response, just in time delivery, right? Like make that stuff in response to what's happening. And don't worry about,
the rest of it.
20 hours from now in gameplay terms, what's supposed to happen at that point. Like we don't need that yet. And honestly, we might change our mind by the time we get there and do something else, right? Yeah. So
I think what's also interesting about there is like is the uncomfortable truth that like it would be really nice to already have everything, right? It is true that like it would be nice to be able to go not just like with exactly what you need right now, because what you need right now kind of talks, especially in a game like Crashlands 2, that has a lot of these circularities going on, where things talk across to go backward and forward and kind of in every direction. And so
like if we made Crashlands 2.5, right, with all of the resources and like everything is the same except we just build a new map, tell new stories, right, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like now you're just playing a fun, I mean, it's still challenging, right? But now like everything is focused on like the design of the world and how the story unfolds and like
exactly,
and that's what the details are because you got all the parts. Like you're playing with Legos rather than building Legos to play with Legos. Right?
Yeah. So there's that. But there's also like from a production standpoint, what's interesting, and I think this is another trap that is worth pointing out, which is like on an individual level, it is typically faster work to do more of the same thing back to back to back to back. This is definitely true in the case of like when I'm working on terrain, for example. There's a lot of parts.
Reduced context switching.
Exactly. There's a ton of parts that go into that. So like if you said, hey, we're just going to build like the first 3 tile types in this next zone, not the whole zone, so not the other half, but like just the first 3. And then we're going to start building a zone. I'd be like, please don't do that to me though, because I don't like switching into terrain mode is not fun. And then staying like, I would rather just be done with it when I'm done with it and not have to come back. You know what I mean? And so,
Well, and again, it's a holistic problem. And we've talked about this before. Where like one terrain tile is nothing.
exactly,
It has to exist in a context alongside others, and whether it's good is dependent on what's next to it, and vice versa. So you have to iterate on the whole package of
you
tiles.
need all of it to iterate, which is
Yeah.
sort of the classic
you have
thing.
to take multiple passes on the whole suite of things.
And so I think that the challenge basically is figuring out where those truths about certain kinds of things, right, are important enough to say like, yeah, okay, Sam, do all the terrain and do all those chewables because they're essentially terrain too. And we're not going to interrupt you while you're doing those things, right? But you can just go and finish them and we can scope all those out versus like all the resources, which again, like it is nice to know from a resource standpoint what the next one is already to have like an idea of it. But in terms of how the ecosystem in the game works, it's not actually strictly required to get going on having a playable experience that actually does deliver essentially what will happen at the end of the day, right? And so it's really tricky to, I think, figure out where those little fault lines are, right? And then cleave it correctly without leaving too much or too little, off one side of the thing. So I don't know how exactly like even pick those things aside from just fucking it up and then adjusting. I think probably we just didn't adjust because like Adam said, the expectation was this is going to take a while and probably be confusing for a bit, as opposed to like, how do we make it good as soon as possible, which is a very different frame. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because if the thing you're testing for success against is a kind of failure is the wrong word, but is a kind of like error state, as in like normally taking a long time is a negative signal, right?
Yes.
But no matter what the thing is you're doing, if your test to see if you're doing it in a way that is good or the way that you should be is just against something negative and you're asking, am I hitting the bar of the bad thing? Right? Yeah. There's no way. There's no way you could successfully do that.
But so I would talk about the pivot here because the pivot's interesting from a couple, literally 2 months ago, right? Which is we hit this point where, okay, we've got all the resources. We actually still don't have some of the creatures, some of the back end creatures for the zone. And we sit down to a playable. I think Seth does a playable or some play of the game. And it's like, I think he managed like 40 minutes or so in the new zone before like stuff kind of petered out or was just kind of broken and weird and things weren't hooked up.
Yeah. So this was after the demo was done.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Something like 8 weeks ago. Yeah.
And we're just like, okay, like what the fuck is going? What are we doing? What's happening? And then
it's a feeling of like, we've been working on this for a long time. There should be more stuff in here.
Yeah. But again, like what was happening is everybody had very long cables. That's the best way I can put it. Very long cables that had not been, or like individual steel filaments that had not actually been cabled together. Everyone's over there just like building more and more of their little fucking filament, and we hadn't been able to like tie it together. And so the cadence.
But also everyone's building like weak filaments because they're not informed by what the metaphor falls apart here, but they're not being informed by the other. Because usually what's happening is like people are working on their different kind of subdomains, their primary domains of ownership, right? But how stuff is progressing, it's like if you had inspectors checking the quality of the cables or the filaments as they're coming out, right? Mm-hmm. And they're talking to each other about, oh, this one's kind of fucked over here. Like, oh, I'm doing this with my filament, and if you don't compensate on your side by adding some more, I don't know, copper into whatever the fuck.
Juice.
I don't know. Yeah.
Put some more stuff in there, then we're going to end up with some weakness in the final thing, So you basically, because then on the other side of that, not only are you like, oh shit, we got to like start braiding this together, but you also have to revisit.
Yeah, because as you're braiding it, like, wait a minute, this one has a crack in it. And
well, it's actually, again, it's a distance problem. The bigger the distance between like the creation of those filaments and the twining of them together. Right?
More stuff goes wrong.
More stuff just gets fucking weird. And the end result is like more of a wobbly piece of shit right at the end of it.
We've said this before, right? Like almost all the really hard problems with making a game are integration.
It's always integration. Every time.
Like making a picture, like making a sprite of a tree. Yeah, I could do that. It won't be great, but I could do it,
Yep.
But then how do you make that tree meaningful in the context of your game? And that's about integration. It's like, does it drop resources? Does it do something mechanically interesting?
How do you interact
is it
with it?
rare? Mm-hmm. How do you interact with it? Like what are all the ways that it gets integrated into the gameplay experience? And you have a lot of questions to answer at that point. And the only way to answer them is by playing the game.
Yes.
on paper, you can have tons of cool ideas about how amazing this tree is going to be.
Well, and you can even gray box them, interestingly, right? Because we had all these cool trees, more or less, right? They all did cool stuff, right? But
none of that means anything.
It didn't mean anything yet because we hadn't fully integrated, right? And so I think, I don't know, it's just like,
even worse, when it came to our big pile of stuff that we pre-built, there was another layer to that, which we thought we were doing ourselves a favor by thinking ahead, which is, if you played the Crashlands 2 demo, then you'll kind of know what I'm talking about here. But we have these things called insights, which are like kind of like little research projects that you can have your buddies do for you to help like get new recipes or progress and get new capabilities to the game. And one of the ways that your buddies can help you with those insights is by researching the resources of the world and opening up new loot drops. Mm-hmm. So it might be the case that like you've been chopping down, these panflake mushroom things, and you've been getting one type of resource from them. You can pan flaps from them, and then your buddy is like, "Oh, by the way, I got this idea. Like I can teach you how to chop these in a certain way so that you'll get like butter out of them as well, right?" You're like, "Oh yeah." So you research that thing, and then going forward, whenever you chop them, you'll get the stuff you used to get. Plus, now you sometimes will get this new component coming out of them, right? And so that turned out to be a really cool way in Act 1 that we could kind of keep using the same resources throughout the zone to keep a consistent aesthetic and vibe alongside new resources, but then make it so that those old resources still maintain some kind of relevance. Yeah, because they're dropping new components, right? Which is great. And so coming into Act 2 at the start, we were like, okay, yeah, that's a thing we're going to be doing, right? So we made all the baseline components, but then we also made all of the bonus components that will drop later. But in order to make the gameplay, feel more reflective of what it's supposed to be like, we locked all those optional or those like later components behind insights. Mm-hmm. So we had to make probably like 40 or something insights to gate those components behind. But then as we're looking at our progression map of like how those insights connect together and how they
what's the actual player experience, right?
Yeah. Then we have to start answering questions of like, when do we open up these components? Because now suddenly we have to make a decision. We have to make decisions about like 50 different things and how they're going to integrate together. And we can't answer that question because you can't even really play the game to know how it feels right now and what the player's desires are. And so we had this, as we were trying then to build out the zone and tell the story and stuff, we had to keep kind of like, it's kind of like when you have a cabinet that has way too much bullshit in it and there's something in there that you need, right? So you have to keep like pushing crap to the side so that you can get to the thing that you want to do. And so we had to just keep ignoring all these insights and being like, oh yeah, we'll worry about that one later, right? Just keep ignoring them actively while we were trying to build out the zone. Until the time came that those insights would actually be used and that those components would be used, right? So it's just, again, like one of those, you think you're doing yourself a favor by pre-doing the work, but the real work and the part that actually matters is the integration part, and you can't do that until you get there in the game.
And there's some more nuance there too, right? Because kind of what you're talking about is you actually did an early integration in the sense of like you gray boxed a bunch of stuff, you filled out here's all these things, and like the goal was to say like we know how these things work together, like this insight unlocks this, here's all the things that this thing drops. We don't know the details about like how they unfold in the game and stuff. So there's a remaining integration problem, right? But it was starting, like what you started with was like, let's pre-integrate a whole bunch of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. And then we have to do the final integration, which is get it all tied together, right? And the alternative to that is the one where you are integrating all of the parts at the same time. So the just-in-time delivery part is all of it, right? Where you're like, you start working through the game, you're like, okay, we need this armor set, we need these things to happen for the player experience. What reason do we already have the resources we need to do that, or do we need to add some new drops? Do we need to add some new insights? Do we need to do whatever?
Exactly.
And doing it that way, on the one hand, gives you just-in-time delivery, except now the integration problem comes back in a way that so basically it's like, do you get delayed by stuff or do you get confused by stuff, right? Because in that case, now it's like, well, we need to pull everybody in to figure out, okay, let's agree. Here's the things that have to come in. Same as to go make art.
I think it's
the story.
The question is, what is getting delayed, right?
I mean, the difference between knowing something needs to happen and being able to do it, and if you have full control over that versus if you need to now.
But we did it. But here's the thing: we thought we knew it needed to happen, but we didn't know it needed to happen.
Yeah.
So an interesting kind of like, I guess, a way to kind of describe it is like we pre-created a bunch of solutions to problems we didn't yet have.
Yeah.
And so then we had to find problems for those solutions. So it's like,
the best one is to be integrating everything as you go. Just in time.
But it's really the best way is to be creating everything as it is needed, right?
Yes.
So if we had like been playing through and it's like, okay, we're coming into this new like tier of content, and we got a new type of resource we're going to introduce, but also we want to keep using this tree that the player's already been interacting with. Can we add a new component to that tree with an insight so that so we can start using that new component with this new combination of things. And then at that point we would create it, make the insight, and boom. But what we did instead was we already had the component and the insight, and we had to constantly for like 8 weeks be like, is it time? Is it time yet for this?
Yep.
Can we use this thing that we have? Can we do it now? And we just had to keep finding a place to insert it and make it relevant because it was never relevant to start with.
Yeah. Well, and the way that everybody works and the way that the collaboration works and the way that the tools work and all that kind of stuff, right, becomes designed around whichever kind of approach you take. Because again, part of the reasons you would choose one of these over the other have to do with like resource allocation, who's doing what, how hard it is. It's all structural, right? But once you choose one, then that's what you'll start designing your tools and your processes around it, all that kind of stuff, right? And so then it makes it also start to feel like, even if you start seeing like, shit, maybe we should have done it this other way, right? Mm-hmm. You're becoming more deeply entrenched in the hard way, right? So that the less hard way is only going to be less hard, even if you look at it, you're like, conceptually, that's better, right? But there's a mountain of like new problems that arise for us. Because it's like I was saying, like, if you're building things as you need them, then that requires a lot more collaboration, right?
Yes. Yep.
And it changes the nature of what it means.
And more task switching.
Because a lot more task switching, yeah.
You're not doing batch, like we're not, okay, let's just batch create all 80 components for this biome or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
so it's more task switching.
We need a component today. Let's make that component.
More task switching, more collaboration. And if the way that everybody's been working and whether the tools are designed, all that kind of stuff, doesn't help do that yet because that isn't how we were working, then that basically becomes like, well, now it feels like that's not an option to take.
Yep.
Because
transition costs, right?
Yeah. So now you have a high transition cost, which is basically what we're dealing with now, I assume, is how do we move from this way that was really not working, but everything was like designed around that, to this approach that's going to be better for everybody actually, but dramatically changes. Like,
I think what's neat about those that like all the tools that we built actually, because they were also focused on the integration problem in the first place, like Game Changer, how the world editor works, all these things.
Yeah, they're not in the way. It sounds
they're actually not in the way at all. It's actually it's very, very much a like, we should
we were in the way.
We should quit doing this and then do this other thing. So basically, what we came up with, and this is where the pivot shifted, was what I think Jen refers to as story breaks, which is a term from like screenwriting, where essentially we're basically planning it out just the next
chapter by chapter
leg of the player experience, instead of be like, so here's what's happened so far, here's where the player's at, here's their kind of context, here's some things that we want to maybe mechanically introduce or like change up in this next beat for them that might feels like, given what they've been experiencing, would be a bit more fresh. Here's some ideas for like what is happening overarching in terms of like where the story needs to go. And then, it's been a while since we've added a gadget or whatever the fuck, right? So you kind of put all that stuff together, and then it takes literally everybody who does content. So it's myself, Seth, and then Jen doing as far as like deciding which content to do, and then having a conversation with that big soup of facts sort of floating around, and then essentially doing this threading of all the things back together in a way where what we come up with is then a coherent plan that says, okay, we're going to go from here to here. Here's the things that are required. Here's the art pieces we need. Here's the dialogue that'll be written associated with those things, etc.
Which still ends up being a batch, right? In the same way. But now
it's just a playable batch. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a small batch. We're back to where we're, supposed to be, right?
We're batching by chunks of time of the player experience and not by category of thing. Right? It's not like, all right, let's make all the insights today. Okay, those are done. quote, I'm putting that in quotes, but they're just done, right? All right, now let's make all the components this week. That was our method of batching before was more about each individual person's task switching cost.
Yes.
And less about what would actually help us to continue playing through the game.
Again, the studio's goal is to deliver a game, right? Not
which
to
actually
deliver-
opposes each of our individual desires to just do one thing for 3 weeks at a time. It's just tough.
That's tricky.
Well, I think there's an interesting thing too with this idea of like kind of category first development, right? Where you large batch, you like there's some category, some aspect of the thing, and you're like, okay, we got to basically like fill out this category completely. Like you're saying, like figure out all the stuff, and then we tie it together afterwards. That's also kind of like the natural way. That's actually the easiest way to think about and organize large problems, right? Because we've been building our own work management tool, which we haven't really talked about on the podcast yet, but we've been doing that. And something that I think has like repeatedly kind of revealed itself in that process, because the whole point of the tool is to make it easier to see the shape of the work, right? And I think one of the biggest struggles that I've seen myself and everybody else have is the sort of tendency to organize things categorically, even though the system is designed to let you organize things based on like actually what should happen. What's the order of the work? How does the work relate to each other, right? Because it's so much easier to think about it categorically rather than
it's easier to think about what a thing is versus when do I need to do it.
Yeah.
Well,
how does it relate to the other things?
It's like, I think you have to. It's just like the soup to me. Like, again, when we sit down from these story breaks, we build first this soup of like, here's all the facts, right?
Yeah.
You have to do this. Here's our category.
And you got to organize them somehow. Yeah.
Yep. And then it's like, okay, but what do we need then how do we spin this into something that is actually meaningful as opposed to just
how do we relate it all together rather than just being here's one category, here's another category, here's another category, and then now you got your categories, and then now externally you try to figure out, okay, how do I like keep all this in my brain and like manage it, right? And it's interesting how like as we develop like a work management system, it's just revealing the same set of like, here's why this stuff is hard, only more abstractly, right? But it's like the same thing. It's just like, it's integration problems. It's figuring out when you have like, there's infinite work that has to be done, right? So there's always more stuff coming in. You can only do a subset of it, especially once you start getting specializations, right? Then like you're responsible basically categorically, like the stuff Sam does. Art stuff, right? And then various aspects of the design stuff. So if the Seth does programming stuff, various aspects of design stuff, right? Like, and so we have these like silos, like you're gonna do it categorically because that's how your solution domain works. But that is not a good long-term way to collaboratively manage complex work where those things all talk to each other.
It's missing the forest for the trees. Is what it is,
exactly.
Right?
Trying to figure out how do you bridge that divide, I think is actually the core of like what all of these problems are. So how do you get
100%.
between categorical versus integrated management?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's also there's a cognitive load problem here when it comes to planning work in an integrated way, which is it's real easy. It's like in Sam's case, if we've got a new plant that needs to be made, he knows that he needs to make the sprite for that thing, right? But before that, we need to have a design discussion to figure out like what is this thing going to do, blah blah blah, and then he and I will collaborate on that, and then he can make the sprite. I can work on the mechanics, and then there's a sequence of things and handoffs and stuff. And when you're thinking about, we got to make this resource, you're kind of thinking about like your own piece of it, and you don't want to have to also think about everybody else's piece of it
the
at
experiential
the same time
of the end product, right? At that time is it's hard to
and
keep
so in a work management tool, you're not gonna if Sam's like, all right, I'm gonna like put this, we need this thing to exist in the game, so I'm gonna put in the tasks that are necessary to do that. If in Sam's case, the most natural thing to do is just be like, make the sprite for this tree, and there, that's done. But then separately, I would then have to be like, hey, what's going on with this tree thing? Do I need to do anything with that, right? And Sam would be like, oh yeah, we probably got to have some mechanics for it or something. So then I make my own task, like come up with the mechanics for this tree. And so we have two separate tasks, and there's actually a bunch of other missing tasks that we haven't even talked about that nobody's put in to the work management tools. You have all this invisible stuff going on.
But also like no one person, for exactly the same reasons you're describing, it's not because like Sam should come in and be like, okay, I'll make that task. And also I know that Seth has to do X, Y, and Z.
I know Seth's job and Adam's job. I'll just describe exactly what they would need to do to support it.
So it's that fragmentation or the specialization creates this complexity that is just impossible to manage by yourself.
You can't be a silo. You cannot work in a silo.
You can't even plan your own work.
Planning can definitely not happen in a silo.
I think that's something that's so frustrating. Why we're like always pushing like each other, or there's a constant source of friction all the time.
Oh yeah.
In a collaborative environment where people have fairly well specialized tasks, right? Which is that you're trying to do your stuff. You're trying to do the stuff that you can do, that you're responsible for. You're trying to push that stuff ahead. But realistically, you can't do the right stuff at the right time without knowing exactly how it integrates with what everybody else has to do. And you can't know that by yourself, which means that you have to always have this extra step of like, okay, given that we're working on something as a team with a team outcome, and we're doing handoffs the thing doesn't exist until 3 people do their part or whatever, right? You can't do that without everybody coming together and like spelling it all out so that everybody can just see and knows here's how all these things actually work together.
But you also can't like riffing off the earlier point about like pre-planning stuff. You also can't do that too far in advance for stuff, right? Yep. So you kind of have to have everybody synced up, this is always a speed problem, right? Which is like, because certain parts of the work have to happen first, right? Before others. Certain parts kind of will do like a fast follow, but they need to have been considered, during the creation of the thing. Certain parts will like happen once in the beginning and then again at the end, to like, okay, now that it actually is done, let's tweak X about this thing so it's more accurate given the final form. So you got this like real complicated, real tangly mess, right? Of stuff that needs to happen when and whatever else. And it's very tempting then to basically try to plan out also what happens next. Like, oh, we planned this piece. We could see everybody's work in this piece. Can't we just go ahead and plan the next piece? Like someone's going to get there a little sooner than someone else. And this is like, if you've done sprint stuff or any agile stuff, some of the things I'm saying will sound similar because you have a lot of the core ideas with these sprints or whatever else is that essentially like the team talks about what the goal is, shapes the work, and then sits down to do it. And the whole point is that you're not supposed to, in most sprint contexts, you're not supposed to, if you get done early, like do other shit. You're supposed to help the rest of the team in whatever way possible to help them finish their tasks that they have left, right? Because of this problem. Because if you
could, part of the planning would include like, okay, here's like the next set of things that you could go off and do in the case that like safely you get ahead or whatever. Yeah.
And honestly, I would go so far as to say like the plan about what you're currently doing, that's a plan. The plan about what happens next is a wish.
Yeah. Yep.
Because there were so many times, even like once we started really getting the cadence down of how to build out, Act 2, where, we'd be like, okay, there's this next big section like where we're trying to get to. And here's like the general thing that the player's going to do when they get there, and I'll be like, okay, got it. And then it's like, okay, but first we got to build the path to get to that thing.
Yep.
So let's talk about that path. And so we would get all the details down about the specifics of what the player's pathway would be to get to that thing. And I would know exactly what needed to happen. And in my mind, I'm like, I also know what the player's going to do at the end of that path. Because we talked about that too.
Yep.
So I would build out the path and, I would take like a day or whatever to build out that section of the world or whatever. And then I would sit down to start working on the big thing that we were leading the player toward, which we had talked about because that's the whole reason we're making the path. I'd sit down and do it, and then I would look at our vague ideas of like the generalities of what we wanted to have happen, and then I'd be like, "This is nothing. Like we need to actually pin down what the fuck is happening."
It turns out it was a lot more vague than it seemed like at the time because you can't see it yet, right? You're just not close enough. Yeah.
And so it's kind of like what you're doing right now. Get into the specifics, do check-ins, sync up with everybody so everybody knows what's happening, why it's happening, and roughly what's happening next, but just like at a very high level.
Yeah, but that layer abstraction problem is still really challenging, right?
It's very challenging.
Because you run into that problem where, like you're saying, if you're too vague, it just doesn't mean anything. You're actually not like it might feel like you were in agreement, and then you move on and do it, and you're like, wait a second, there's nothing here, right? But
if you get in the right place, if it feels like you have a plan for what's happening next, then you're in the right track. Once you get there, you realize you didn't. but it should feel like you know what's happening next.
But now you know,
what I mean?
but then you discover what the actual questions are and what's required to get it into a concrete state, right? Because the goal always needs to be actually you need the minimum level of concreteness required to ensure that everyone's on the same page and everyone can do their work successfully, right?
Yeah.
And any more than that is micromanagement and takes time away from actually doing it. It's a waste of time. Yeah. Because you also need to be able to let everybody go and actually do the work. And that's the other part of of specialized kind of role-based work, right? Is that you can't be like, okay, Sam, I need to know, make sure that we talk through every detail about how the art comes into being, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't want that level of granularity.
That's a Sam problem.
That's a Sam problem. Yeah. Leave that out of the picture, right? What you need from Sam is basically like, how long is it going to take? That's what you care about. It's like we're going to need these art assets, and we need to know what happens to them, like what we need, what's required, where it goes next, and that's the part of, and who's responsible for what. In a rough sense of like, have we planned it far enough in advance? Do we have a concrete enough plan to get for everybody to get their parts of the work done? But finding that balance is a constant process of like fine tuning. And of course you never get to have an answer that you just stick with, because then the problem domain changes and it just keeps on moving. Right.
Yep.
So tricky.
It's very tricky, but I will say, I think we learned a lot from that stumbling at the start of Act 2. And by the time we got to the end, the pace at which we built out that zone, once we really did that pivot, like we
insane.
blasted
together. Yep.
Absolutely insane. And I think that's what I'm excited about for this next one, because of course we're heading in. We're in the home stretch, right? And and I feel like as far as like where we're at, both what we've just done and then how that translates to what's next, and how it feels like, at least at this point, how it feels like it's going to go. Who knows? In probably a couple months, I'll be like, we fucked it all up. But
but differently.
It's like it does. If I feel very, very good about that momentum that we were able to establish, and like just how well this whole thing started working after a few weeks.
And it's that core thing is you never do things right. That's not a thing that happens, but you do things better. Right. And so we're gonna look back and after the final act, we're gonna be like, here's all the things that we wish we thought about and knew to think about, bleeding into that would have made things a lot easier, that we may not get to carry into the next thing because that's Act 3, right? Mm-hmm. There's still more stuff there's still more stuff to do after the game is, quote unquote done, right? But the shape of that work is very different than deliver each act in sequence and try to create the whole ass main thing of the game, even content updates, post-launch updates and stuff. That's a different kind of problem.
It's a different animal. Yeah.
It's a very different kind of problem. So whether or not we even get to take those lessons in to the next thing, who the fuck knows? And which is also that reminder of why it's so important. Like as you're doing postmortems, try to understand what went well, what went wrong. It's kind of like the opposite problem with the work. It's like in the work, you're trying to find exactly the right level of abstraction for managing it, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're trying to understand the work, you're actually trying to get as abstract as you can, because that's the only way you can take stuff forward is if it's abstract enough that you can then figure out, once you're in new concrete territory, like how does this apply? How is this metaphorically related?
Yeah. So we'll have plenty of new mistakes to make when we get to that point.
Yep.
But for now, at least we will not remake the same mistakes we just made right now. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it in the charts and help it have a successful launch, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.